Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to call to order our third in a series of budget study sessions for April 26th, 2010. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Quintero. Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here. Thank you. Before we go to staff, I see we do have several visitors, and several people have put in cards requesting to speak, and I'm going to give those folks the option of speaking now at the beginning or at the end of the presentations that we're going to get from staff. I have a card from Mr. Milano and Mr. Mohel. If you'd like to speak now, please come forward. If not, you can wait until the end of the presentation, but you only get one opportunity to speak. Okay, Mr. Milano.
How much time do I have?
I'm going to give you a blended time of 4 minutes.
All right, I do have a power presentation. Let me start. Mayor Najarian and members of the City Council and the City staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I think that for the past 6 or 7 years, I have been a regular at these budget study sessions, trying to present to you a point of view from someone who's dealt with budgets for a very long time and from someone who installs financial systems to various companies for the past 25 years. And the one thing that has been missing from these budget study sessions, in my opinion, is a consistent comparison of these type of expenditures across multiple years. And so today you have before you the issue of the paramedic and this minor additional other enterprise funds. Now, so I want to address briefly what I feel you should be looking for in evaluating the paramedic fund. If you had before you a record of the paramedic funds paid as an expense from the City of Glendale, as an expenditure, going back to 1992, you would find that the expenditures would be zero throughout the 1990s, and it's very likely that it was zero before that. Why? Because we had a private paramedic service that basically charged the insurance companies, Medi-Cal and Medicare independently, and it did not require any funds from the City of Glendale. It did not require any expenditures. It all changed in 1999 because the year before, Fire Chief Haynes presented to the City Council then the idea that if we let the Glendale Fire Department handle the paramedic service, it would be better, it would be more responsive, and we would get $17 million in revenues to the general fund in a period of 5 years. I have those documents. And that was the justification for it. But two things changed. In 2001, you changed the pension system, making these additional paramedics now become under this umbrella of a much more expensive way of maintaining it. And if you had before you the expenses for the paramedic service year to year, starting from 1999, you would see a continual increase of those expenditures. Now, those expenditures are basically offset by the charges they make to Medi-Cal and Medicare and the private insurance companies. But it has been insufficient because their costs are so incredibly high that it is no longer sufficient, and they require funds from the general fund to basically balance those expenditures out. And if you do not receive a review, a chart or a graph, looking at the last 10 to 20 years, you won't be able to truly assess the direction in which these expenses are going, which means that we can no longer afford it. If we still had a private ambulance service, AMR, as a service contracted by the city, our expenses would be zero. The city's expenditures would be zero. Now, let's assume for a moment that we take into account that we get a better service. We measure better service by the outcomes of the lives saved, and we don't get that information. If we want to say if you have a heart attack or if we had X number of heart attack victims attended to by the paramedic service, I would like to know how many arrive at the hospital alive. Many cities do that. They give you a performance outcome. We don't get that. So if the justification is that we get better service, we don't have the documentation or any recording of that. Now, I think perhaps my time is out. I appreciate your time.
Those are 30 seconds.
I also would like to say that before you, I submitted the documentation concerning the city's pension obligations as reported in the budget in 2001, and you will see that in the budget for the general fund, it shows a 0 on the budget. And next to that on your blue sheet, you will actually have the documentation that came in as a request from the Public Records Act that shows that it has never been 0. We have always had, at the very least, the safety personnel pension contributions that were at the very minimum $7 million a year. It has never been 0. Yet the decision to expand the pension obligations were made on the assumption that our obligation was 0, and the documentation from the city, the budget, and the CAFR showed completely different figures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Mohill, would you like to speak now? Okay. Is there anyone else who intends on speaking that would like the opportunity to speak at this time? Okay. Thank you. Mr. McFall, let's proceed.
If I might, just to make a couple of very brief comments. On the paramedic fund, we absolutely appreciate the concern of the increased costs. I do want to make sure the record is correct, though. When we did have a private provider, we subsidized the private provider. There actually was a budget, and offhand I wouldn't be able to locate it. The fire department would, and the finance department, but we actually subsidized that because they weren't able to provide the level of service that we had requested without a subsidy. And then beyond that, the council, as we had discussed during that time, we were concerned not with a variety of factors, but also with level of service. And in starting the new paramedic program, there was a very definite attempt and was successful in increasing the level of service. And if council would be interested in the performance factors, we would certainly be able to provide those to you.
I think we would if you could put those together, both the financial aspects and the qualitative aspects of the service, so we can compare.
And I think on pensions, and I'm sure based on the article that came out this week, and there will probably be a number of questions, but there is a very important point to make up on the pensions. And I don't think there's any one of us here who would argue that there has to be reform in the level of pension, in the way that employees receive pension. I think that's one thing that the community and staff that we would all be in agreement with. We would probably be in disagreement about how that should go about. But there is an important point. When the enhanced pensions were put into place a number of years ago, a unique aspect of how Glendale went about doing that and the way that we negotiated is the employees actually agreed in perpetuity, or at least through as continues to be renewed in the contract, to pick up an employer's cost, a portion of the cost of the pension. Unlike a lot of other communities, such as our neighbor Burbank, where Burbank, who has the enhanced pension systems, they actually pay the full employer's, the employer share is paid by the city. In this case, in the city of Glendale, that actually is a cost that when we negotiated, we said the only way we can reasonably do that is if you are willing to pick up a portion of what would otherwise be the city's cost. And as we continue to move forward to looking at two-tier, more than looking forward, aggressively pursuing two-tier retirements, we are also, as council is aware, working with the employee groups to have them pick up even an additional amount of the employer's costs. So with that, we will provide information on the paramedic fund, the comparison between when it was privatized and to date. We're starting now on budget study session number 3. It's startling that it is only 3. It seems like we've been discussing this and working through this for many more than that. Today's topics are really going to be reviewing the non-general fund operations, the other major funds besides the general fund. We have a brief PowerPoint on each one. All of the respective departments have been directed to provide a relatively high level and respond to questions that the council may have on these. And of course, we're prepared to go to any detail that we need to. So they're going to provide an overview and then also discuss some of the challenges within those funds. And with that, we'll just turn it over to Bob Elliott to start this off.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. First off, we're going to have Public Works discuss a number of their special revenue funds and their enterprise funds. Then we will move on to fire. They can go through the paramedic fund, Verdugo Communications, and the hazmat program. We will then move to the ISD department, review that, and then on to community parks, and then police for today. And a reminder, we will cover GWP on May 13th. So with that, I'll invite Steve Zern up to the podium and start Public Works.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good morning.
Morning.
This morning, we are going to, as Mr. Elliott indicated, go through our special revenue enterprise fund and our internal service fund, the new internal service fund, which is the fleet management operation. So if we... There we go. That's just a listing of those. So we'll start out first with the transit fund. This is the 9-10, 10-11 adopted budget, 9-10 proposed budget for next year. I should preface the transit fund by saying we are at a crossroads and a very critical point when it comes to the transit fund. And I have a presentation for you that will be dedicated to that. I think we need at least a couple of hours to talk just about the transit fund. This fund is primarily or solely funded out of Prop A and C money, which is voter-approved initiatives that set aside sales tax for transportation and transit-related projects. We have, as has been our practice, consumed every penny of that in providing our bus and dial-a-ride service. We are almost a victim of our own success. The bus system has been very, very successful. 2.2 million people a year we carry. It meshes nicely with the metro service, and we provide service to our transportation center that links up the train, passenger train and commuter train operations. However, we're at the point where we're consuming every bit of money each year that we're making. We're beginning to draw down on our fund balance. So it's time for us to get together to talk about what the future is with regards to our lines and service. That to help with that, we've conducted what we call a transit line-by-line study, which we will bring to you and present. The good news is we got nice report on the service we provide and the people that we're serving. The other part of that is we're going to go through and look at the lines, those that are most productive, those that are less productive, and where we might want to make changes. Included in that is proposed service level cuts if we need to go that way. We have two-tiered. We have revenue increases and proposed service level reductions. Now, I mentioned A&C. There's also the most recent voter-approved initiative, which was Measure R. And progressively, it's less money that gets sent to the public agencies. But with Measure R, and also at least the restrictions with how you can use the money has begun to decrease. Measure R monies are essentially set up like HUTA funds, gas tax funds, and they allow you to do street and road work. So what I've asked Mr. Elliott to do is to segregate those dollars and put them in a separate account, because I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to gas tax funds. This year we went through a swap, which to me is a bit of smoke and mirrors. I think what we ended up achieving out of this, not we, I think the state was able to get rid of Prop 42, which was the only measure that protected us. They've got us all now in HUTA. They have the ability to take those monies, at least their borrowing and repayment schedule and definition of an emergency is all different. So I wanted to set these Measure R funds aside in the event that these may become our road money, our road repair money in the future. I know I was not at the CIP meeting. I know Mr. Starbird went over the concerns and issues that we have with that. But could be a backstop for us. Doesn't mean we can't use it for transit, but at this point in time we're being a little bit cautious. In addition, through the hard work of Mr. Najarian, we were able to get what's called Tier 2 funding for the B-line. It's a regional, sub-regional type of grant. It's a 3-year grant with the potential for it to be renewed. And that's just a touch under $700,000 for us, which will be excellent in helping us through this. So when I come back, we'll have all these numbers laid out. We will have fare structure increases. The B-line was a quarter, then we went to free, and we went back to a quarter, and it's been that way. It's never been higher than a quarter. So we want to show you what the fee structure and the fare structure might be with progressive increases and the amount of revenue we'd get. We have a couple of other programs that we think we may no longer be able to afford to subsidize, but we'll bring those to you as well. And then we'll start to go through where we think there's some service level reductions that may be necessary for us to essentially operate within our means. One of the things that's really critical here is we've been very fortunate in getting grants, MTA or Metro monies, federal monies through Congressman Schiff to buy buses, the single biggest capital asset. We've never set money aside, so we've been very fortunate. However, again, I'm worried. If that dries up, we could be very impacted by that. So as part of the new financial plan, we've begun to set money aside. So that's here, just what we all know. Operating expenses continue to increase even at a modest level, while our Prop A and C monies are remaining flat, if not less than what we had gotten in the past, because they're sales tax based. Again, just the transit system review that I want to go through with all of you in a more dedicated setting, because I think it deserves that. The Tier 2 bus operation funding, which is outstanding that we were able to get that. That will help a lot. And then we still have on the horizon is the construction of the Beeline maintenance facility, which we have put together about 75% of the funding for that. We have the site, as you know, adjacent to the Glendale Transportation Center. The time has come for us to look at that. We are in a substandard site. The owner of the property wants to sell it. We've done real estate research that would show where available areas are for something like this. We're talking about beyond Sunland, Tahunga, Van Nuys, Pacoima. If you can imagine running our buses each day, deadheading as it's called, from those kind of locations here would be very expensive. So this provides us the opportunity to keep it right here locally and provide a dedicated bus facility for our maintenance. That's the transit fund in a nutshell. Again, we'll be coming back to that, talk in more detail, but obviously happy to answer any questions.
When do you anticipate coming back, Mr. Zern, with the transit?
We were going to try, because some of these issues aren't necessarily incumbent upon us making decisions before the budget. We were going to let you clear through the budget study sessions and then come right back in early July with this so we can discuss.
If we wanted to consider a fare increase, do we have to go through the public hearings, the Title VI type of hearings that other agencies do?
I believe we do. I'm not positive on that.
Okay. I'd like to have that come to us as soon as possible so we can discuss both the service cuts and the fare increases and any other ideas that come up from the council towards addressing some of those fund issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There has, I know in the past, been expressed by the council desire to serve different locales, so we'll be able to look at those too. Again, we're working within a finite financial situation, unless, of course, we bring monies in from other sources. That's always an option, but we're going to try to bring it to you as soon as possible, Mayor.
And you know, when you bring it to us, you know what it's no secret, there's been a request for additional service on Sundays, some additional service to the La Crescenta area Mr. Draymond has raised. Can you bring us scenarios, cost scenarios, so when we have our session, we don't say, oh, why don't you go cost this out for us, and we're another month or 2 months in, and then we say, well, let's think what a fare increase would do. So
yes.
We have to have public hearings. It's another 60 days out. So we can address it sooner rather than later.
We will do that. We will show you the fare structure proposals. We'll go in 25-cent increments and show you what the revenues for those are. We do cost comparisons with other municipal lines. We'll show you what the service reductions entail and how much that savings is in comparison to the service provided. And we will certainly cost out some of those additional services that have come up in the past.
Okay. Ms. Friedman.
Yeah, when you're costing that out, can you also include data about what would happen if we were to, let's say, subsidize seniors, students, low income, that sort of thing, so that we see what those comparisons are?
Sure, we do that already, but we'll just indicate exactly what that is.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Zern. Any other questions of Mr. Zern on this particular fund? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Zern.
Next, we have the parking fund, and this is the fund that encompasses all of the parking meters, parking garages, city-owned parking lots, both the funding of these, the maintenance and operation. And some of these numbers you're seeing as we make adjustments. We have increases in the operating costs. This year, we're doing a number of things with the cost allocation and IS department's cost allocation model. So some of that impacts this, but majority of this increase that you see is from our garage operator and really a parking citation processing firm that we use to process our citations. Another note that we get charged here is a county building fee, which we have to give to the county as part of our citation revenue. Last month, they gave me a sheet. It was $80,000 for 1 month. We budget somewhere around $750,000 to $800,000. That number tends to fluctuate. Well, it goes one way. It hasn't gone the other way. So that's something else we have to grapple with when we look at our revenue, both parking citations and from the garage and meter operations. Our look at this year, some of the issues, we want to go back as we do as a due diligence effort to look at our fee structure for both the garages and the meters. We recently made some changes downtown with the new meters that we installed, but we'll continue to look and compare ourselves with other firms. Citation, it's not up there, but citation fees is also, we work with the police department to see where we stand in relation to how much the penalties are for citations. And we do that regularly as well. Keep ourselves, and we're not at the top, we're not at the bottom, we try to keep ourselves somewhere in the middle. Again, there's the construction fee that the county assesses to us. And then one of the things we're looking for is the continued transition to the electronic and the pay station metering systems that have proven to be pretty effective on brand. Once we got past a couple of issues, still a couple to work out, they seem to be working very well. They cut down on the number of meters you need. It is in most cases more convenient, but we'll continue and obviously come back to you as we expand that program.
Do you have, I see the expense side here, but is there the revenue side information available?
I don't have it here, but absolutely we can provide that. We're probably, the fund balance on this fund is about $4.6 million, but we can get the revenues as well. Do you have that?
Especially historically, to the time before the automated metering on.
Well, to answer that question, Mr. Mayor, it's usually pretty tight when it looks at revenues versus expenditures. The garages usually make a little bit of money. The meters probably about $2.5 million a year. But the meters have resulted in upwards of $500,000 to $600,000 additional. Of course, it was on brand. There were no meters before, so it's not just the meters themselves that increased the revenue. It was the fact that there was nothing there before. But that did give us a jump start with regards to our revenue. So we make somewhere in the neighborhood of about $600,000 a month. So, and our expenses, as you can see, are in excess of
10
that.
million, close to 10 million.
And this is another area where we need to pay particular attention to our rate structure and our citation revenue. I should say that did not include citation revenue. So that also will increase the overall number. But we're pretty much spending what we make.
And folded into all this are the, we did the bidding for the garage concession.
Yes.
The parking concession, that's all in here.
That's in here. It's a modest increase by the contractor. It's a cost of living adjustment for them, which was built into the agreement. But we did realize some overall savings, at least in comparison to what we had as contract before.
Okay.
But that's a big expense for us. Any other questions on
Questions on parking? Okay, thank you.
Sewer fund, our wastewater operations, both our city maintenance of the wastewater conveyance system pump stations, and also the money that we pay as part of, as being a member of the amalgamated agreement with Los Angeles, we pay for the conveyance and treatment of our wastewater at their plant, at a plant that we own 50% of with them, and then also the Hyperion main plant in El Seguin. This is again, you'll see some adjustments there that had to do with, mainly for us, is a capital depreciation issue that we dealt with finance. And what it came there was an interpretation in our amalgamated agreement that Hyperion, we pay a capital charge for Hyperion. That somehow gave us some legal right to the plant. Well, we have no legal right to the plant. We have 50% of LAG, which is the Los Angeles Glendale water reclamation plant that's just off of Colorado and the 5. We don't have an interest in Hyperion, although we're required to pay a capital fee to them for the maintenance and upkeep and expansion because we're part of this amalgamated agreement. It's rolled into the amount of waste that we send there. So what's happened is, while there's a legal opinion, there's also the auditor's opinion, so we've kind of compromised and put in a much lower depreciation schedule, which increases our depreciation. This is an extremely healthy fund. We have over $60 million in surplus or reserve. I think I've mentioned to this council and previous councils that we're very concerned about what the future holds with regards to what LA is going to do in their overall wastewater treatment. So if, for instance, they have hinted around in the past that LAG, the plant here, could close, it could be turned into what's called a scalping plant just for reclaimed water. We would like to see it expanded. And some of the issues environmentally they're dealing with is, do we go to a membrane system, which is a reverse osmosis, which is extremely expensive. Any capital upgrade to that facility is 50% our burden. So I've always wanted to keep a healthy reserve here in the event that the capital costs down the line, in order for us to meet all of the regulatory requirements that are here and will continue to come. I can't tell you that in wastewater it occurs almost monthly, where there's something else that comes at us for the proper maintenance and treatment of our sewer facilities. So I like to keep a healthy fund balance in that regard. Capital projects, which includes not only what I mentioned before as our contribution to LA for both Hyperion and for LAG, it also includes all of our conveyance system maintenance and upgrades, construction. And we've done a lot of work in that area, I'm proud to say. Dormant and wastewater systems that are dormant and falling apart usually result in the firing of a public works director, so I've always wanted to make sure that wasn't the case here. As you see, communities in San Diego and Huntington Beach and others that 20 years ago they had a problem, they still haven't caught up yet. We've spent a lot of money keeping our system upgraded. We recently finished our update of our master plan. Happy to say we're still less than 1% below capacity for all of our lines. In other words, only somewhat less than 1% of our lines need to be upsized. So, and we've taken on some major projects in the wastewater system, and we are going to take some more. Before I get to those projects, let me mention the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which is a stormwater regulations. These are even more restrictive than the wastewater itself. Actually, I'm not sure how we're ever going to get there under what the regional board has set up for us. I was recently at a meeting where there's 5 issues you have to deal with: trash, metals, nutrients, bacteria, and sediment, and they go in order. In dividing up what they think is going to be the potential for cleaning up the bacteria, that's just one. Our share of that would be about $330 million. So there's a long way to go on this, but nonetheless, we need to keep, again, some money set aside for when this does occur. We don't have a specific fee for that. We may need to think about that in the future, but for right now, this could be even more burdensome than our wastewater situation. Trash, the first TMDL, we're still struggling a little bit with that, but we've got most of the issues in place. Metals TMDL, which, as you can imagine, is fuel and brake pads and those kind of things. Bacteria, which to me is, 80% of the bacteria comes from the wild avian population, so I'm not sure how we're going to manage the birds, but nonetheless, it gives you an idea of the burden that we have. We're in the process of installing a reclaimed water line at the Corp Yard. Water and Power is working with us on that. This will allow us to completely ramp up all of our cleaning operations and using reclaimed water, street sweeping, sewer flushing, tree watering. We'll be able to do it all now with reclaimed water. As it turns out, because of our routing system, we're not always able to get to a reclaimed hydrant, but in this case, this will solve that problem. Also putting in a reclaimed hydrant for the fire department as well for their use. The installation of the southern wastewater transmission line, this is, in the course of putting together what we call the Palmer sewer, which went all the way from Adams and Chevy Chase down to the corporate yard on Chevy Chase and the city and the LA border. We noticed that one of the things I picked up is the entire southern part of the city drains through that area, and it crosses the railroad tracks into LA and then is metered at a manhole in their city limits. None of that wastewater is downstream of our plant, so it can't go to our plant. It's all sent to Hyperion at a much greater cost to us. So what we're working on now is we're going to pick it up maybe 150 yards ahead of that, and then drive it through our corporation yard over to Colorado and put it into the
Is that
LA
stormwater or
sewage. This is wastewater. But this is about a $10 million project with, if you can imagine the cost of what we are charged by LA. It's got like an 8-year payback on the savings we would have from not sending this wastewater down to the LA plant. So that's under design right now. Wastewater rate analysis, we're going through that right now. I just wanted to see, we are probably at in the lowest 5% of communities in and around this area in Southern California regarding our sewer fee or our wastewater treatment fee. I'm not necessarily promoting that we raise that, but we have a split rate, flat rate plus water usage. So we're having the consultant look at that to see if that's still viable and to see if our water rate usage is consistent with others. Plus, we're in a water conservation mode, so we have to see how that impacts our ability to continue our revenue stream in the wastewater fund. Kenyatta storm drain, that's another big project that we're undertaking right now. This is a huge drain off of Kenyatta, will come all the way down. It's something that we had hoped the county would do for us, but that hasn't come to fruition. And so I just have our staff going ahead and doing it. It needs to be done, and it'll take care of a lot of issues we have with storm runoff in that particular area. And then finally, the Doran Street pump station. This is a pump station that is probably 50 years old. It's located at where the confluence of the Verdugo Wash and the LA River are. And so we want to move it to the other side of the Verdugo Wash, rebuild it, and then hopefully have it for another 50-plus years. But that's about a $1.8 million project. That's what I have for the wastewater.
Okay. We have a question?
Sure.
Yeah, just a quick question, not being at all an engineer. The rehabilitation of the Kenyatta storm drain, is there any chance of diverting that water to replenish our groundwater? Or does it have to go out to the ocean?
Yeah, as Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, my understanding is we can't yet use that water to replenish groundwater. It would have to be treated in some manner. And I don't even think you can use reclaimed water to replenish groundwater at this time.
Well, reclaim's different than storm runoff.
Stormwater
Can we
is-
check into that? Because I'm not sure that that's
Well,
necessarily.
with the NPDES I just mentioned before, the sense is from those who on the coastline is that the water is extremely polluted with all of those trash, metals, bacteria. So I don't believe you can, but I'll certainly check it out and let you know.
Okay, or to what level they need to treat it if they were going to use that.
And that's a whole different discussion. There's talking about, do you have a separate waste or stormwater treatment facility? Can we blend it with the wastewater in a dual system and treat it that way? So those are ongoing discussions. But I'll get you some more of that information.
Thank you.
Along those lines, I saw a presentation by the LA County, I'm not sure which department or district, but it was dealing with the MPDES, and they had designed throughout the county a series of ponds and pools and riparian habitat for these, for this wastewater that couldn't just go directly into the system. And if we're potentially liable for a huge, what was the number you said, 330
That was just
million?
for one of the constituents.
Just for
Mr.
one of
Mayor,
them?
was estimated 330 million over 30 years.
I think it would suit us well to do some planning at this stage, whether we can make use of our Verdugo Wash for some sort of, it all comes to the Verdugo Wash, I take it, or much of our city's drainage
Yes.
watershed, I guess, comes there. And we've got a designer of the big brother to the Verdugo Wash sitting up here. Is that a fair description.
How'd you describe it?
No, not you, but the project. The LA River, a big brother to the Verdugo Wash.
Corps of Engineers built both of them, yes.
So, I think we should really take advantage, and we may never use it, but as a planning exercise to think of ways to, alleviate the draconian method of either pumping it to have it treated, but something more acceptable and creative. So.
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and this is along what Ms. Friedman asked, is the whole issue of infiltration being an alternative to capture and treatment. And that's something we've been looking at and continue to look at. That would be one of the ways you could do that, is to put it into some riparian area like that and hold it, retain it, or just have infiltration. One of the things we struggle with on infiltration, though, is we don't have a lot of open land, and we don't get credit for the mountain areas. That's another bone of contention we have. We don't get credit for, when they look at our square mileage, they look at the whole city. And our argument's always been, well, this is undeveloped area, open space, open land, where you're getting exactly what you wanted, which was infiltration. And so far, they haven't seen it that way. But in the developed areas of the city, we have a lot of concrete, a lot of roof drains, and that kind of thing. So we have to start rethinking, getting together with planning and other folks about how we change our requirements in order to provide this infiltration alternative.
Yeah, a lot of cities now, I believe Santa Monica is requiring a zero runoff for new construction, so you can't drain to the street. at all.
Zero discharge. That is exactly what some
And
cities are going
I would
to.
agree, so I don't know if anyone's taking notes for planning, but I see Tim Foy is nodding. That can go on their long list of future tasks.
Always nodding. Mr. Weaver, and then Mr. Quintero.
A story I know I've repeated here before. Some 20 years ago, decision was made to build a rubber dam in the LA River over in Burbank. Decision had been made by some powers that be that this rubber dam, which was inflatable, would capture the water, it would rise up, allow water to pond behind it. The storm would deflate, so the river would operate as designed. But other than that, would capture the water behind the dam and pump it. I'm sure all of us have driven on Forest Lawn Drive, heading over to Barham. You see all those open areas. The water was going to go there. It had been used there before, was going to go there and infiltrate into the groundwater system. Got it all done. Then the state of California said that water coming out of the Tillman treatment plant, where it had been treated, was not clean enough to go into the ponds there. And the dam has never been inflated, just sitting there. And that was 20 years ago. And I know that our standards, state standards, are much tougher now than then. The chance to take any water and simply dump it in isn't going to fly.
That's exactly right, Mr. Weaver, and that's the dilemma we fight is the whole concept, and this is not bad at all, is flood control channels have become estuaries now. And that's fine, but when you set standards of the water will be drinkable, swimmable, fishable, that's a tough task when you're dealing with all these issues that, as I mentioned before, whether it's animal waste or metals that are naturally created in our environment. So more for that. Stay tuned. There'll be a lot more of that issue to come as we as they continue to ratchet up the regulations.
Mr. Quintero.
I was going to say, even if we capture a small percentage of the water, but especially in the higher elevations where there may not be as much pollution. I'm sure up above Foothill there's a lot less pollution than down by Chevy Chase. I mean, anything we do is a plus.
Yes. And luckily up there in the north we have a lot of infiltration, so it's nice. We have parks and open space, but anything more that we can do, absolutely. That's a good thing.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions on that fund,
The
let's
Refuse
move on.
Fund, which manages all of our various refuse and recycling collection operations, street sweeping and the management of the landfills that portions we're responsible for maintaining. Again, this is a very good operation, very sound operation. We have about 17 million reserves. We did not have a rate increase last year, but we are proposing one this year. That's mainly to keep pace with two things. One is the increasing costs at the landfill, the tipping fee. I think there's a misnomer among some that we don't pay the tipping fee. We pay the tipping fee. That's just the way the agreement has been structured since day one. We don't pay the host fee, which is the 25% additional fee, but we do pay the tipping fee. So we have to adjust when those fees go up, and they just went up in January. The other thing is that our continued replacement of our fleet with clean burning fuel, CNG, compressed natural gas, is what we're using. It's excellent for the environment. The trucks just cost a little bit more to buy. So again, putting our equipment reserve monies and making those purchases required us to increase our revenues. I think, let's see, what do we have? Again, we went through, and I won't belabor the point of the cost allocations and ISD. Those are all good things, and they just caused some adjustments in the budget. We will continue the environmental review process for expansion of the landfill. I think last week when I talked to you about the waste conversion technology, it's kind of a parallel track. One takes a while to develop. We don't want to lose the opportunity to make sure that we have additional room at Shoal Canyon to dispose of. Whether we use it or not, we'll see. But it would behoove us to at least go through the exercise and try to ensure that we do get some additional disposal area. Development of waste conversion technology, I think I went through that in probably more detail than you cared last week. But that we will continue to forge ahead. We really kind of want to step that up right now and see what's out there, how quickly we can get something going. Whether we get a couple different pilot programs on our own, or we can find a technology that we're ready to get behind. But as you can imagine, I'll continue to come back with council on updates regarding that. Today I have a meeting actually with my counterparts in finance, legal, and water and power as we begin to put together, as I told you, that internal team that will look at all aspects of a potential project. Zero waste policy, again, I mentioned that. We'll be coming forth to council with that. That's our goal, to eventually get us to a zero landfill situation where we're not landfilling anything. We're recycling every bit that we can. That we can't recycle, we put into a waste conversion technology which generates electricity or steam or both, and also has a residual product that can be used and recycled as well, whether it's road-based for street repairs or whatever it is. But at the end of that policy, we get to zero. And I don't have a timeline for that. The sooner the better, obviously, but we will continue to work with that. We have, at the inactive Shoal Canyon landfill, which we're responsible for maintaining, we have the slope that goes down from the golf course to the active landfill. That's our responsibility. It has not been rebuilt, and it's eroded a bit, but we need to go ahead and get in there and re-bench that, put new drainage, put new irrigation, and finish that slope restoration off in the next 12 to 18 months. CNG slow fuel station at the integrated waste management yard. By hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we will open our CNG fueling station down at the Glendale Transportation Center, which is great. It's great for us. It certainly will reduce our costs of having to go to Burbank to get the fuel. But nonetheless, still shuttling vehicles, especially for refuse trucks that have to be filled and ready to go the next day, and street sweepers. At the same time, the buses are coming in to be fueled. I think it would behoove us, and again, we've looked at the city of Pasadena who did this, is to put what's called a slow fuel station right in the yard. This is where the trucks come in at the end of the day, they hook up to this. Instead of the rapid fill that takes 20 minutes, you fill them slowly overnight. The next morning they're ready to go. I think it would be an excellent investment and would really help our refuse operations stay competitive.
Mr. Quintero.
How is the CNG put into the tanks?
Through it's very much like a regular dispensing unit, and it just happens to be that the pressure in there releases much slower.
No, I mean
It's a regular gas
tank. How is it filled?
You mean the source?
Yeah.
We get it from the right from Southern California Gas. We just tap in. There's a big line on Chevy Chase. We would tap. I think there's a cross at Chevy Chase and San Fernando Road.
Yeah, so
we
there
just
won't
tap
be-
right into that with a compressor on our side, and there you go.
Yeah. I think that's a very good idea. And by the way, that clean energy station, I drove by it yesterday. I mean, it really looks beautiful.
Yeah, it
stands
it's turned out
and
nice.
It's a nice.
We kicked the tires a little bit. We had a couple test runs, so we're working the bugs out, and hopefully it's operational.
Where's that at?
On the transportation, at the
the yard?
transportation center on Cerritos,
Okay.
the train
Right.
station.
It's off the street, but it's well landscaped and.
And that's open to the public, right?
It will be,
For-
yes. So we expect
Counts and
in
all.
Glendale taxi cabs and, excuse me, shuttles, airport shuttles, and some of the other folks who use CNG will be there. The next thing I have is increased customer base, and we want to continue to do that. My goal is to pick up, excuse me, every customer in Glendale. And I don't think there's any reason why we can't. We offer an excellent service, and you can't beat the price. But internally, we've had some restrictions, just basically self-imposed, not for any other reason, and that's how we set the resolutions and ordinances up in the past. So we've slowly begun to change those in order to give us the ability to go after other clients. Case in point, Americana. The Americana came on. They actually asked for proposals. We submitted a proposal. We were awarded the contract. We made some changes in our service hours and the type of materials we collect. Later, Brand Boulevard, there's Porto's Bakery, and I couldn't understand why we didn't have that account. And the reason is we didn't offer Sunday service. And they need service every day, sometimes twice a day. And as you can imagine, they can't wait till from a Saturday to a Monday. So we implemented Sunday service, and we'll collect anybody that wants to have that service. So as we begin to, and as we've actually had people out talking to those that do have private contractors. Many of them are in contracts where they had a teaser rate to get in, and they're locked in. We've given them our card and said, call us the day that contract's up, and we'll beat the price. I mean, we just are able to do things like that. And while we can't adjust the fee resolution, we can certainly say, we can give you a smaller container, we can give you a recycling bin that allow you to reduce the overall amount of trash that you generate. And hopefully those are all incentives for us to continue to increase the number of folks that we have, customers that we have. Another thing is, and I think Mr. Elliott's mentioned this in the past, the refuse fund, and looking at it this year, had the means to potentially help the general fund, although it's Prop 218 protected. We looked at, and I looked at with the city attorney's office, while most of our operation is a property-based fee, in other words, which is covered under 218, the commercial part, the bin accounts are not. Those are competitive. You can take us or you can not take us. So we compete on the open market, which means that is not covered by Proposition 218. Bottom line is, some of those revenues we can help by moving to the general fund as we go through some of these more critically tough times. Again, we have a proposed fee increase. We've been before you to set the public hearing, and we'll be back to discuss that in more detail.
Question on the refuse fund, and maybe for the city attorney. What discretion do we have to exclude private operators from servicing resident or apartment buildings or commercial accounts?
It's very limited. We would have to be looking at franchising, and I believe, is it a 10-year period, Steve?
A
where we have to give a minimum notice of multiple years to exclude and ultimately franchise.
Mr. Mayor, we've looked at that, and the potential to go that way, whether it's a limited franchise or an exclusive franchise. And the time frame that Mr. Howard refers to is you have to give notice of 5 years. That means you don't take anybody new in that, but the people who are working here already get 5 years, and then you go through the process. We've looked at administration fees versus the potential revenue. We really think from that administrative and revenue standpoint, we can accomplish what we want. The law, AB 939, which is the waste diversion law, allows us to assess a fee on private firms. We've been assessing that fee, and I'm going to propose that we increase it again. So if you want to do business in Glendale, it's going to cost you because we're providing all of the recycling programs and the waste, and we're having to take care of the landfill and all of those. If you're a private firm working here, you should be paying us a comparable rate. So I think that's easier for us to manage. We still probably, the last time I ran the numbers, and we'll have to do it again, would realize about as much revenue through that means as we would from a franchise fee with less hassle in trying to manage that. And we are in the process now of, we reinstated our auditing service so that we go through and do about a third every year of our private firms working in Glendale. And we're going to see more, probably a little bit of pressure to add Glendale accounts as Pointy Hills landfill closes, and folks will come in, try to get one account, and then be able to use Shoal Canyon. But we're going to be very judicious in how we give those out.
Okay, Mr. Quintero.
Have we done a study, or does the staff have some idea so we can compare with other cities that do have either franchises or
Yes.
all of the above?
Yes,
So we
Mr.
have
Quintero.
a feel for
Yes.
other.
We actually went as far as do the comparison, talk to the other cities, and draft up a potential ordinance as well. But again, as we sat down and looked at it, it seemed to me, at least now, at least today, that we could get what we wanted through what we call it's a AB 939 fee is what we call it, and it's a gross receipts tax, that we could get what we wanted with that, and it's a little bit easier for us to manage. And again, I'll go back to my point about wanting every account. There's going to be a point when they can't compete with us. I don't know how they can do it now. And so we will continue to drive that issue until, we're providing the level of service everybody wants. Sunday, double pickups, whatever, and our rates are down where they're at. I don't see what we call hustling, taking bins out of subterranean parking lots. Nobody does that as well as we do. So I just think it's a matter of time before we press so hard that we get most, if not all, of the business, and it'll just be sort of a self-correcting measure, if you will, and the private sector won't be able to stay with us. The Galleria, which has never been our customer, to my knowledge at least, is now coming around, and I think we will get them. We have Target, and I think the rest of the Galleria Galleria management's talked to us, and there's a very good chance that we'll get that too, which would be a big coup for us. We'd have both of the major retails and then just begin to pick away. But we can present that, Mr. Quintero.
Is there generally a higher profit margin in servicing commercial accounts than there is residential?
Yes, sir. In fact, our rates were set in such a manner as that they subsidized the residential. So we felt that the commercial rate would help the homeowners of Glendale realize a lower rate. So that's always been. It's not a lot of subsidy, but it does help to feed back to keeping the rates as low as we can for our single-family 2s, 3s, 4s.
You, next one.
Fleet Management Fund, this is our new consolidated fleet management operation, which went from segregated between the four departments that had their own garage, combined into one as an internal service fund. This has been quite a challenge for Mr. Elliott, his staff, and April Fitzpatrick behind me. But we're making progress, right, Mr. Elliott? We're making progress. It'll take us a couple years to kind of put this all together. We want to make sure that we've got hourly rates and these other things nailed down. The fund is in good shape, even when we put it all together. Again, we think that due to some surplus monies that we experienced as part of a fuel adjustment, that we'll be able to give back some of that to the general fund. We gave this fund, gave back money last year, and I think we can do it again this year. So finalize all of our fleet verification analysis, get the hourly rates, continue to pursue our environmental regulations and use of alternative fuels. We've got LNG, we've got electric, we've got hybrid, all beginning to come online. We're at least testing, trying to see how that works for us. Glendale Water and Power, which is facing a continued retrofit of their equipment with CNG. Like we did at the Public Works garage, I think we're going to need to retrofit their garage. You have to have very specific standards to work on a CNG vehicle inside. There has to be a continuous air exchange and no open flames, as you can imagine. So I think that it's getting to the time when we need to do that. It's probably our major CIP-type project. Equipment replacement fund and replacement policies, we continue to work on that, making sure that we always have enough money when we need to replace equipment. Doing things like dealing with hand-me-down vehicles that one department may give to another, and how we deal with making sure that that's properly accounted for. And vehicle standardization is just something that, where we can, we're looking at trying to have like equipment. So if it's a pickup, if it's a 1-ton pickup truck, that if it happens to be that Chevy works or Ford works, that we try to get all of those throughout the city so that the mechanics then have a bit of standardization. The warehouse can standardize on parts. And we can take that to a number of different levels, but it really helps in inventory management and the learning curve for the staff. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any final questions for Mr. Zern? Thank you, Mr. Zern.
You're welcome.
Mr. McFall, where are we going to go to next?
From here, we're going to move into fire. Harold Scoggins will make the next presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. This morning I'll be talking about three of our funds: Hazardous Materials Fund, Paramedic Fund, and our Verdugo Fire Communications Fund. And when I talk about the Paramedic Fund, I'll try to answer some of Mr. Milano's questions as we go along, but we will follow up and get you the additional information there that's needed. The first fund we'll talk about is our Hazardous Materials Fund. As you can see from the slide, the budget is pretty much the same. It's a little bit more this year than it was last year, and there's two major causes of that, and that's our cost allocation that's been done recently throughout the city, and our ISD service charges, which are new to that fund. What we've been doing to manage that is we have a position that we're running vacant right now. And one of the other things we're doing is watching our M&O spending to try to keep the costs down also. If you can go to the next slide. So when you look at our revenues that we expect to get in from that fund versus our operational costs, our revenues are below our operational costs. And a couple of things I talked to you about are what we're doing to offset that. But our revenues basically for the Hazardous Material Fund, they come from inspecting hazardous material environments, giving permits, reviewing plans, underground and above ground storage tanks, the hazardous material fees that are charged on the residents here in the community, and grants and a lot of miscellaneous items like that. That's what make up our hazardous materials fund there. And we think we'll be successful this year in keeping our costs down to below our projected budget. Right now, our expectations for this year are just that. Next year, we assume the same because of how we watch our budget. So our projections in the budget document are a lot higher than what we're actually spending on a day-to-day basis, which is good news there. Some of the things that we do, hazardous household waste collection events, about 100 of those annually. We do curbside motor oil pickup along with a lot of other items that we pick up. And then we issue over 1,400 hazardous material permits throughout the course of the year. So it's a pretty busy place, our Environmental Management Center. Next slide. Some of our challenges that we're going to be facing, as you know, the rest of the world's facing also, is our permit revenues are weak, and that's due to the economy, or businesses aren't storing as many hazardous materials to conduct their business as they once did. We've reduced our staffing over there, and that's had some other impacts on us in keeping up with our inspections and different things like that. What we've done there is we've cross-trained many of our inspectors to perform hazmat inspections as well as other inspections to try to offset the needs. So that's a continuous challenge. And then we're going to have a new code adoption coming through in the fall of this year. And that's going to take a great effort by our team in making sure what we adopt in our code meets the needs of the community here. And some of our opportunities. We haven't raised our hazardous materials collection fees since 1991. And basically they just haven't kept up to the growth. And that's one of our challenges, but it's also one of our opportunities if that's something that the council would like to address and us to take a closer look at on how we can do it. But that's one that would have to go to the vote of the community for a change because of how it was enacted. So be more than happy to have a deeper discussion if the council would like to engage in that discussion. Also, some of the things that we're doing is we implemented this year our fire company inspection fees and our false alarm billing fees. The false alarm fees have been on the books for many years, but this year we're actually putting it into play. Just so you know, we receive approximately 1,000 false fire alarms annually. That's a lot, and we think we need to provide some more clear education to the community, let them know when they have issues with their systems or if they're working on their systems. So the nature of a true false alarm, that's not our intent, but when businesses have multiple false alarms throughout the course of a calendar year, that really puts a significant impact on our response system. Any questions?
Chief, what are the fees that we're talking about for the, you said they haven't been changed since 1991, that's
Right.
20 years.
Those are our...
It's not the household, because household collection
It's
is...
the household collection fees, and basically, on apartment units is 55 cents per, and single-family dwelling, 75 cents per month on either one of those. And they were enacted in 1991, and they haven't been changed since 1991.
So that's embedded where? Yeah, I mean,
That's embedded.
how is that?
Let's see.
Is that on the DWP bill or the
Yes,
property
well,
tax bill?
that's who's billed. Well, Department of Water and Power does the billing for us, and that's where it lives at.
Okay, so it's on their...
Yes.
It's on their billing statement.
Yeah. Households hazardous waste disposal fees, and that's where it lives, and it's billed through Water and Power.
And that supports all your programs for the collections? and
Not
all
all
these-
the programs. The permit supports a portion of it when we respond to emergencies, and we bill after the emergencies for hazardous material events. That supports it. We get a number of grants. That also supports it. So there's approximately 6 different revenue sources, but that is one of the biggest ones. And along with the permits, that's the second.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on hazardous materials? Thank you. Next one.
Our paramedic fund. The paramedic fund has been a challenge because it's been underwater for many, many years. So I wanted to give you more of an understanding of the why to that question. And also along the way, I'll try to address some of the questions along the way that Mr. Milano raised. And I'll just start off with the first one that he said that we did not pay the private ambulance provider any fee. That's an inaccurate statement. The number was between $350,000 to $400,000 a year is what we paid, and it's somewhere around in that price range. But what we got for that's the key to providing a real understanding. For most of the time, AMR or Professional or the other ambulance company that was here, we received 6 paramedics on duty a day. Now that's 3 rescue ambulances placed throughout the city. The last year or two of the contract, we had 4 ambulance cars on duty a day here in Glendale. And it's important to know that, because each day here in the community, we have 4 rescue ambulances. We have decreased one of them, but we have approximately between 17 and 19 paramedics on duty a day. We have some simple goals with our paramedic program that we really try to focus on. We try to get a paramedic in every district, and we have 9 fire stations here in the community, so we have 9 districts. And that's one of the goals. When we had AMR, we didn't have that, and we couldn't implement that with AMR without a significant cost. So today, we have that, and we meet that. And with the number of paramedics, that's a significant change, because when we respond to the emergency, having the right people at the scene to deal with the emergency is key. Whether you need an IV with some significant drugs or to be intubated or all the other things that go along with being a professional paramedic. So when you look at our fund and how it was presented, there's been a lot of changes that have taken place over the years that have caused many challenges for this fund, and with all the changes in healthcare and different things like that. But when we go into this year, we can look at our EMS response fees, our gross, and what we bill. And next year, we're projecting to bill approximately $11.7 million in billing. Now, if we collected 100% of that, then obviously our paramedic fund would not be underwater. And it's been that way for many, many years, but we can't collect for that entire amount. And the less write-downs and write-offs, to give you an understanding that WD and WO, the write-downs are the fees and the costs that are written down by the insurance providers that they provide a lesser payment for. And that's one of our major challenges. And then the write-offs, and those are the fees that we just don't collect on, whether it's from a person who does not have health insurance or whatever the fact may be. But over the years, that number has continued to grow and grow and grow. And next year, we're expecting it to be approximately $7.3 million. This current fiscal year we're in, to offset our costs, there was a transfer into our account of approximately $2.1 million, which is the number that comes into the discussion for the fund being underwater. Because of the transfer in, the fund is not whole, it can't sustain itself. If we went with that same transfer in this year, you would see our net would be about $6.5 million. And as you move into next fiscal year, we have done some things. We've removed some of the paramedics out of the fund, as you all know, by pulling one of our rescues out of service and adding a BLS component, which equated to approximately a $700,000 a year savings. So when you look at our salaries and benefits and M&Os, and we're down in that fund by approximately $500,000, which is significant. But to get the fund where it needs to be, it would take many, many years of that, with the expectations that the call load would not be increasing. And that's just not the case for EMS calls. They are increasing. Every year we're seeing it. You know, it could be a small amount or it could be a large amount. But the fact is, they are increasing. Any questions on those numbers there? Yes, Councilman.
I have just a couple questions. So under a private ambulance type system, what happens if they get a call from someone who's uninsured? How do they recover that?
Well, I don't believe they have any different ways of recovering it than we have. We have collection agencies, we have a billing company, but if a person doesn't have the money to pay, they just don't have the money to pay. So I don't believe they have any different means of collecting. We try to exhaust those means.
And then have we looked at how we think the new health care bill is going to impact this, assuming that there's less uninsured out there?
We're still evaluating it, and we're still trying to figure it out. One of our concerns is if there's less reimbursables, that could be another major impact on our system, but we don't know that part yet. We're still looking at that.
Mr. Weaver.
Chief, as I recall, AMR had one facility down on Broadway, was it? So any calls that came out of that location? So we have 9 places where we can disperse from. So you have any idea, comparison on response time on emergency calls?
Well, a couple of different points, but AMR had the facility on Broadway. They also had a car at Station 29, and they also had a car at Glendale Adventist, which is in close proximity to Fire Station 25. Obviously, because we have paramedics in our fire stations every day, our response times of getting an ALS person on scene in a more rapid manner is there. We meet that on a more regular basis of getting that ALS care. When our paramedics are on our engines and not on our RAs, they still have the necessary equipment that they need to deal with any of the life-threatening calls. This year, we've even taken it a step further with our tiered dispatching. I'll talk about in the Verdugo piece. But when we added our BLS component, we needed to try to create a system that could make sure, or ensure as much as we possibly could, that our ALS resources were available on a more higher priority level. So when we put our tiered dispatching piece in play in January 27th, we put our BLS cars in play. We know that we're keeping those ALS cars available more for those life-threatening calls. So our response times are better. I mean, obviously, they had 3 or 4 locations, and we have paramedics in 9 locations. And we have the means to get an ALS resource on the scene. Many of our promoted ranks now, as this program's been in place since 1999, we're now starting to have fire engineers and fire captains who also carry that skill set also. So they're deployed out in the field. So all this makes a big difference to patient care. And if you put the next slide up, Michelle.
I have a comment.
No, I'm sorry.
Before you go, Chief, Mr.
Yes.
Yeah, I spent 28 years in the workforce development business, and so I think I know a little bit about training EMTs and paramedics and so forth. And people, I think, get lost in terms of the skill sets that are required. The difference between a firefighter who is a paramedic and some of the people, and I don't mean to disparage them, but some of the people serving with the private ambulance companies, it's basically night and day. I mean, it's not even a comparison that should be made. So to come to the podium and to focus on money and money and money, talking about people's lives. And we certainly have a large percentage of older residents here in the city of Glendale. So I just don't get it. You keep focusing on the cost. I'm very happy that we have that high level of paramedic service. So, I mean, I want to compliment you and all of the other firefighters that are involved in these efforts. It's very important. In the event of a major disaster or catastrophe, thank God we're going to have the kind of trained medics that your organization has in the ranks. So I just, I have to listen to it, but it makes absolutely no sense at all. And now that we've gone to the 2-tier system that you'll be talking about shortly, that's a great way to, when a call comes in, it doesn't require that level of care, that we move on to a more civilian type of response.
Chief, did you have something else to follow on, Mike?
No, I was just going to move into talking about the number of calls, so you have an idea of what we're dealing with.
That's one thing I want to know, number of calls. And do you keep any statistics at all about how many lives you saved by getting there quicker than the private sector did? Is such a thing kept? Keep log, we saved another one today, or?
Well, we don't have a line item in an Excel spreadsheet to say how many we saved, but
they're faster, you do.
We do know how many heart attack patients we respond on, how many stroke patients we respond on, how many traffic accidents, trip and falls. We do know how many of all of those patients we respond on. We know how many patients that were not breathing and heart not beating when we arrive on scene. We know how many of those patients reach the hospital. So can we track that type of data? Absolutely. Do we watch that data on a daily basis? Absolutely. Is that important to us? Absolutely.
But once they're in the hospital, you don't keep any records after that, do you?
No, we don't keep a hard set of records of once we're in a hospital, but you have to imagine that our people who are out in the field, when they respond on a person who is either not breathing and heart not beating when they get there, or it happens en route to the hospital, you have to know that that has an effect on them. So most of those paramedics do track on a personal level the patients once they drop them off when there's a significant event that's taking place out in the field. I mean, how can you not? That would be like someone that you happen to come in contact with and you had a significant effect on their outcome. How could you not track that? Our people do, but we don't keep a hard record of that. But we know all the other numbers, and that's important to us, yes.
Understood.
Could you expand a little on what Mr. Quintero was saying? Because this is an area that's new to me. What is the difference between the level of training that was in those private ambulances and what now is responding through the city to these emergency calls?
One of the biggest differences is you're getting a professionally trained firefighter paramedic, and to me that means a lot. That means that not only do they have the professional education of becoming a paramedic, but they're also a professional firefighter, which means that they're a dual function, or they can do a dual purpose. Not only go on EMS and ALS and BLS calls, they can also go inside and fight the fire and do fire company inspections and public education and all the things that we require them to do to make sure that we have a fully functional fire department. So the professional level is I mean, it's just so far above the privates. And that's one of the main reasons why all the private ambulance companies, EMTs, and paramedics take our tests, because they understand that. They see that. Not just being a paramedic gets you in the door. You have to go through the entire process, and we train them up, and our training is very thorough. And we're real proud of all of our firefighters and firefighter paramedics for the service that they provide to the community.
So putting the fire training aside, is there a difference in training between the people on the private ambulances and the paramedics in terms of medical training?
Well, the only true difference would be you would get more ALS contacts as a public provider than the private provider. If you look at the nature of EMS response in LA County, the public sector, which means municipal fire departments, has those ALS contacts. How do you get better? By having the ALS contacts. So that is the true benefit. The education, the schooling is all the same, but the contacts with the critical patients, so you have that training in time of need in this current setting and surrounding that we have here in the Los Angeles Basin, becomes, the critical dividing line.
And my last question for now, compared to when we had the private service, how many of our firefighters also have that level of paramedic training? In other words, do we have more of our... So
yes.
what's the difference in terms of numbers?
At the peak, AMR had 8 single-function paramedics on duty a day, and that was only for the last 2 years of the contract.
No, but I mean, I'm sorry, how many then, at that time, of our firefighters had that additional paramedic training?
None.
None, okay.
None. When we transitioned to the program, we sent large groups of our firefighters to school to be trained as paramedics.
Mr. Draymond, then Mr. Weaver.
I want to try to answer that question in a different way. From the practical end of dealing with this personnel, there's a huge difference. And the difference isn't just the training. I see a bunch of snickering going on over here about the questions and the answers. It goes back to Mr. Quintero's comment that it's not all about the cost. It's not all about the money. A private ambulance caregiver, whatever you want to call them, is an employee for a business. They're trained, but they're not invested in the community, and they're not invested in the lives in the community that they're serving. Our firefighters, before they are even paramedics, are invested in the lives of the people in this city. That is by training. But it's also by nature, because that's what causes people to become trained public safety personnel in the first place. Then on top of that, they become paramedics. I can tell you from personal experience. I can tell you from the days prior to our program in this city, when we were using private ambulance services and having to call a private ambulance service for a parent that had had a ruptured appendix. Not appendicitis, a ruptured appendix. And in those days, your chances of survival are about 50-50 at that point, maybe. I can tell you that the top ambulance service that arrived were employees for a company. They couldn't negotiate the equipment down a narrow hallway. They couldn't negotiate the equipment around a corner simply to extract my father from their home. And it became all about the equipment, all about simple equipment, like a stretcher or a gurney, By contrast, sometime later, having had to make use of our paramedic services in that same home, it's a matter of care and interest and investment in the human element. That's what makes our police department go round. So it's not just about the cost, it's not just about the training, it's about the level of interest and the level of care. And I'm not saying that people who work for ambulance companies don't care, but they're not invested in the human beings that live in this particular city the way our firefighters are. And it's not because our firefighters necessarily even live in this city, but we are the people they serve. And so there's a huge difference as far as I'm concerned. And to sit here and to be talking about our cost was zero, no, it was $400,000 a year, to me is irrelevant in that sense. If it is you or your wife or your kids or your parents that are the individuals in need, you want the best, not just the best trained, but you also want the people who care enough to make that trip to the hospital the quickest and the most life-saving experience possible. I think that's what we have. I would never want to go back.
Mr. Weaver, then.
I recall one time I had to call your paramedics on my wife, and I presume when we had the private service, you'd get one or two paramedics would show up, an ambulance. When I called, we had at least 4 to 6 firemen in the house with my wife. And I think I read somewhere each of them has a function in that service. And having that 5 or 6 there with their own specialties, being able to maneuver my wife out and stuff, I think is a blessing. And I was thinking while Mr. Draymond was talking, if you have a house fire, and your firefighters go in and you find out somebody that's unconscious, smoke inhalation, whatever, when you had private ambulance service, would an ambulance automatically be sitting there just in case somebody in the house needed service, or would you have to have called for it?
It depends on the nature of the call. But now there's not if you didn't suspect it, it may not be on the run card.
And now
it's not a question.
You have
Now
it.
it's not a question on most calls that we go on, because we have so many, even if we don't have a paramedic on scene, which we do deploy on every structure and traffic accident, and you pick the type of emergency. But now it becomes less of a question because we have so many firefighter paramedics on engine companies. That's why the question goes away, with the necessary equipment to handle those type of emergencies. That's the true value. It's patient care.
Ms. Friedman, then Mr. Quintero.
Yeah, the reason I was asking that question is because I wanted to just understand fully the impact of having this level of training amongst the general, sort of the firefighting population. I didn't realize that you didn't have them trained to that level when you had the private ambulance service.
Oh, no.
And I would think that for a disaster-prone area like this, that when you're out there fighting a huge wildfire, for instance, having a certain percentage of your firefighters having this paramedic training must be hugely valuable at times, unfortunately. But the potential that the guy next to you out on the fire line is also a highly trained paramedic, I would think in certain situations could save firefighter lives, as well as anyone they encounter out there.
Yes.
Mr.
What is the number of paramedics in the fire service currently?
In the fire department,
Rough idea, I'm just curious.
68.
68.
Exactly.
Okay. So we went basically from 0 to 68.
as
Right.
opposed to 8.
That's-
Right, and it's an ongoing movement to get more of our firefighters trained. We have 3 in school currently. We have a few in this current fire academy. So, we see the value. And we respond to over 14,500 EMS-type calls annually. For us not to make this a priority wouldn't make sense, and it is a priority. And in those 14,500 calls, we have about 12,000 patients, and a good number of those patients are transported. And all you needed to do is happen once in your life to know the value of it. It doesn't take 2 times. It doesn't take seeing it. But having a family member or a friend, or it happens once in your life, you really understand the value of it.
Thank you. Mr. Draymond.
I'm sorry to chime in again, but as I was sitting here thinking and listening, and I recall in 2007, and I want to relate this because it's another example of the difference between a private ambulance service and our paramedics. In 2007, I hadn't been on this council very long, and I was at the time caring for an elderly parent. And I was not at home. I was out at a function, speaking at a function. And during that time, my mother had a stroke, and a neighbor, fortunately, realized something was wrong, called the paramedics. It wasn't just the fact that the speed with which they got her to the hospital, but it was something else. The neighbor called me and said, you know, the paramedics are here, and he said, I don't know if you need or want to know this, but they're combing through the house. They're checking through the house. And I said, that's fine, don't worry about it. But that's another thing. They made sure it wasn't just about collecting up this body and getting it to the hospital. It was also about looking at the residents to make sure things were safe, things were in order, things were secure. Were there pets? Did something go wrong that related to the, you know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, professional ambulance service doesn't do that. They're not invested in the human lives in the same way, and that's important. They made sure the property was secure. Private ambulance services don't do that. So to me, it's a non-starter as a discussion point. What we heard earlier.
That concludes that page.
Thank you. If there's nothing else,
Well, we can go to the next page.
the slide.
Next slide. So, one more. Challenges. Some of the things that are moving forward for us as challenges would be electronic patient care records tracking. That's one that's being mandated. That's coming down. There's a lot of work being done around the region and looking at different systems. I know one of the plans, the area fire chiefs are going to be putting forward some grant funds to start the survey on what are the best systems out there. So as a region, we can try to move together as one, because this is something that we all have to do. So it's important that we get the best system out there to do it. Changes due to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. We're on the health care reform. We're a little unsure right now on how that's going to affect us. What we do know is that our payer mix is remaining constant and our reimbursables are going down. And that's a concern for us, because when our Medicare numbers are about 38%, and then our Medi-Cal numbers are about 24%, when you think those two numbers alone, that's over 60%. And if those costs are automatically reduced, we know it going in, that's a challenge. Private insurance is about 18%. But what's happening in the private insurance world is a lot of individuals are raising up their deductibles to where they're higher than the cost of our bills. So just because you have private insurance does not mean your insurance will cover the paramedic costs of the call. And then the private pay, that makes up the balance for the non-pays, non-insurance, and we try to negotiate the rates to try to make it a usable system for everyone. Go to the next slide. But we have some opportunities ahead of us, and one idea to throw out to this council I think is important is a community Glendale Medic subscription program. And I think that is an outstanding program that we have here in the community, but out of our over 200,000 residents, we have approximately 2,200 households signed up for it. And what is Glendale Medic? Just to give you a brief on that. That's a subscription program for approximately $60 annually, and it's billed on your water and power bill, $10 every 2 months and $5 a month. But what does that mean to the community? Well, that means the community would not see any ambulance bills from the Glendale Fire Department if we had a community subscription program. That means that if a person had Medicare, Medi-Cal, we would still bill those agencies. If you had private insurance, we would still bill them. But you wouldn't see a bill from the Glendale Fire Department as you may today. And there are individuals in the community with no insurance. There's a provision in there for that. So if you have no insurance, your bill would automatically be written down 50% if you subscribe to Glendale Medic. This is very important that it is very important that we're able to sustain the service. This is a way to do it. A way to do it is putting it on the ballot and having the community take a vote to see if this is something that the community would be interested in engaging in. It would make our program whole, and we can remove this conversation from future discussions, because it would be important at some point for us to re-engage in the conversations as the call load continues to climb on maybe having a need to put that fifth RA back in service in a year or two, or unless the calls start to decline. But I don't know if that's going to happen, and we're going to have a way to fund it and other programs that are associated with EMS.
Ms. Friedman.
So if more people in the community or the entire community opted into that program, or if they had to opt in, what would the cost then be? I assume it wouldn't have to be as high then as $60 a year, because you're spreading the cost out. What do you think that it could be lowered to?
Well, as a reasonable cost, we thought $60 a year would be a reasonable cost. We can engage in a conversation on what would be a better number, but $5 a month did not seem excessive, did not seem extreme, and what you would get for that is just so important, and then we wouldn't have to engage in the conversation in the future. But if you have one ambulance bill and it's an ALS bill, it's generally going to be between $1,300 and $1,600 for one ambulance bill when you have something that really goes wrong. And even if it's a BLS component, it's going to be under $1,000 approximately, but that's still pretty significant. And if all the members in one household paid $60 annually, because it's per household. So some households here in the community have 2 or 3 generations in that household. It becomes a really significant savings to the individuals. So I hope that answered your question. Let's see. And another opportunity that we're looking at is medical facility high user impact fees. And what that is, to give you an understanding, we have some medical facilities here in the community that we're responding on between 10 and 30 times a year. It could be a convalescent facility, it could be, but people with medical professionals on staff to stabilize patients, to call a private ambulance company to transport them to the hospital. And that doesn't happen a lot of times. That the patients start to deteriorate because of lack of patient care, and their only option becomes to call 911 for the sake of the patient. We think this would do a couple of things for us. It would reward the businesses who take care of their patients with their medical staff once seen, and it would be a penalty on the patients who on the facilities that did not. It would reduce our call load. It had the potential to do that, and that's one of the things that we're always looking at. Timely, but every time our firefighters go out the door, there's a lot of hazards that we engage in. Just driving the fire engine, the ambulance, or the ladder truck down the street, it becomes very challenging. The number 2 killer of firefighters over the last 10 years is vehicle accidents, and that's not something that we look at lightly. And if this is a way to reduce 1 or 2 times going out that door, that means our firefighters are working in a safer environment. That means the community driving around them is in a safer environment, not worrying about who's pulling over and who's not. So that's another one. What we're doing with that currently is we have a new BLS coordinator on board right now, and we have the list of the care facilities that are high users, and we're going around and addressing the issue with each of the care facilities. And at the end of that, we're going to watch it and see if there hopefully is a decline and if they're doing a better job. But if not, we'll bring back that information to you and ask for some support in helping with that. So that's our paramedic fund.
Thank you. Chief, I would like you to come back at some later date and talk about the medic program so we can talk about that, the structure, the cost, and perhaps the marketing, and get some input as to how we could advance that. And I do want to say I had not made any earlier comments because my colleagues have basically said it all, that I fully agree with them and support their positions on the Glendale Fire Paramedic Program. Let's go to the next one. I think that's the last we have for you.
Our last one is our Verdugo Communications Fund. As the council is aware, we've done a lot of work on that fund over the last year and a half, and we've reworked our agreements with our 2 partners, Burbank and Pasadena, And our budget for this year is it's going to go up a little bit, and there's a couple of reasons why that's going to be moving. It's our ISD charges and our cost allocation also with this fund. But the key to the Verdugo fund is the majority of the costing of the Verdugo budget is from 9 contract cities, Burbank and Pasadena as partner cities, and Glendale also. And what we have been working on also there is developing a cost per call that's similar throughout all the agencies. So the number is going to be going up, but in Verdugo, we've been looking at that on how to offset that and how to watch to make sure we don't go over our budgets there. And in doing that, running a position down or not buying some equipment that we need at this point in time if it's not critical to the survival of the dispatch center. If you can put the next slide up. As you know, Verdugo dispatches over 67,000 calls a year. And when those calls come in to Verdugo, it's important for us to get those calls answered in a timely manner and dispatched in a timely manner. And when you have that many phone calls coming in and you're watching your staffing levels constantly, we really try to make the right decisions on when we staff up, when we let our normal staffing capabilities be in play. As you imagine, during the station fire, we had extra dispatchers in because we were getting so many calls. During the floods, we had extra dispatchers in because there was just so much going on that we needed to pay attention to. But our normal staffing levels and watching what we do is going to help us there. One of the things we're most proud of is 99% of our calls are answered within 15 seconds. And to us, that's very important because everything we do is based on time. Time on medical calls and time on fires. The quicker we can get that call answered, processed, and dispatched, the quicker our units can get out on scene and start to problem solve with whatever they're presented with. Our challenges that are coming up. We have over $3.4 million in infrastructure replacements starting in a few years. We've budgeted for that. You need to know that through Glendale, Burbank, and Pasadena. That's one of our goals also is by then to address all of our contract agencies and bring up their cost per call rate. That's going to help with that also. And also we're going to continue to look for grant funding and opportunities out there that are going to help offset some of these costs for us. Another big one is the narrow banding mandate. By January 1, 2013, all of our radios have to be narrow banded, basically moved into a different spectrum, kind of streamlining the communication superhighway. And that's something that the FCC is mandated, and right now we're actively looking for grant funds to offset these costs. But if not, we have them budgeted for. So if we find the grant funds, they would be winners for us, and so that's what we're going to be looking at also. Opportunities. One I didn't talk about is new agency potential. Verdugo has a very solid reputation, one of the best dispatchers here in the state of California, and other agencies in our local area are engaging in conversations with us about coming on for service. And what that means to all the other contracting agency and at Glendale, Burbank, and Pasadena as the owners means our costs would go down with each new agency we bring in. And we watch those closely. We watch who wants to come in and how we can do the intake on that additional call load, because that's going to mean our staffing has to increase or decrease. But that's out there for us, and when agencies are ready to move forward, we'll be bringing information to you. If you have any questions, that's all I have.
Any questions on Verdugo? Mr. Weaver.
Just a general comment. Just on the internet, I said the listing of the top 100 most stressful jobs in the country. Number 1, firefighter. Most stressful. Hope everybody takes that into consideration if you want to put a knock on the fire department of any city.
Yeah, I read that report, and it's a lot of information in that report, but we know it. Our firefighters in the station know it, and they can feel it, and that's why it's a tough profession to be in for 30 years. There's a lot that can go wrong. So
I didn't look at the whole report yet, so I don't know where attorneys and engineers are on the list.
What city council?
I don't think they have that category.
Thank you, Chief.
right.
Mr. McFall, I don't want to go past 12 o'clock, and
Yes.
I do have I do have 2 speaker cards. Is there anyone else who would like to speak that has not turned in a card? Okay, and I want to give them also the 4 minutes that I forwarded Mr. Milano. So unless there's a very, very brief presentation.
We were clearly optimistic in our ability to make all these presentations this morning. We did want to take all the time that was necessary for the departments to have an opportunity to present, council to ask questions. So we have a backup date for May 10th in case this occurred. So we will notice May 10th for the balance of the presentations, then pick back up on the schedule that you have, that you've already been communicated on the 13th, where we were going to be going to GWP and HR and Finance. So on May 10th, unless anything changes, we'll be rechecking your calendars to make sure, but that was our...
Another Monday at 10 o'clock probably?
I show 3 to 5, is that?
Yes, I
Is
think
that
it
the
is.
correct-
in the
3 to 5
afternoon.
on that
I
Monday.
think that was the date.
Well, we'll just go through and check again, make sure that's still good.
We'll verify. We'll verify with that right now. That was the backup date.
Mr. Draymond.
Mr. Mayor, I just have a question related to some of the scheduling. Is there a possibility that rather than a gazillion dates at 2 hours each, that we could do, as we've done in the past, a longer period of time? We've done 4 hours before. We've even done 6 hours. Not suggesting we should, but I think we could certainly go more than 2 hours and cover a little more ground rather than 2-hour study session after 2-hour study session after 2-hour study session. I think it would also, for those that are not part of the city organization who want to come and speak, public and so on, also I think would help them a bit too, to have to peg down fewer dates. Of course, I don't know what schedules are for my colleagues, but I certainly would be willing to do that.
Checking the calendar real quick, on May 10th, we could go 1 to 5, and we're actually happy to do longer meetings. It has just been a matter of trying to coordinate calendars. Actually, longer meetings works well for us, too. There's more consistency in the presentation.
So if we were to go longer on Monday, May 10th, or start earlier, rather, would that eliminate a May 13th date?
Well, no, we'll still need it for other. We'll be keeping that, but we will place everything we can onto that date.
What's the date we have for May 13th, just tentatively? Because I don't have that on my...
I have it at
2 to 5.
2 to 5 on the 13th.
That's what I have, but I don't have May 10th at all on here
Because he's out of town.
as a date on my
Yeah.
calendar.
Unfortunately, on May 10th, I believe the department head for GWP is not available. And that's why he's on the schedule for the 13th.
Is there a different group that we could hear from on May 10th?
We have
perhaps?
finance and HR that's also scheduled for the 10th.
Okay,
And of
so
course, the 3 that we didn't do today.
it's not on all of the calendars, just so you know, even as a tentative.
No,
So-
it's not on mine at all.
That's not on mine.
We're going
The 10th. Okay, well, let's have Linda
Yep.
go through and check with us, and so I would hope that May 13th then would be the last study session then? There
As
would just
far
be-
as the non-general fund, yes, and then we'll have the general fund wrap-up that will be coming after that, just prior to the submission of the final budget to council for consideration. For the
So you would need time to go back. Obviously, I think there's an interest in having as few sessions. We don't mind going a little bit longer. So work on that, please, and get
Yes.
back to us and see if we can have the
We will do that.
most streamlined plan.
We'll do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call thank you, staff, for all your time, and I'm sorry for those who are here ready to go, Mr. Chapchin or whoever else. We didn't get a chance to go to you, but I think we had some good input. I have 2 cards, Mike Mohill and Harry Zavos.
Mr. Mayor.
4 minutes. Mike Mohill. Let's go to Harry Zavos then.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here, I'll indicate why I'm here, but I noticed that when you had figures up on the board for these various funds, you had the amount approved last year and the amount proposed this year. And in terms of trying to assess those baselines in terms of the previous year, in terms of what we're going to do going toward the future, one of the items that wasn't there that would be helpful is the actual amount spent, not the money that we budgeted for it, but the actual amount that we expended. And that was missing on all of those presentations. Now, let me tell you why this comes up. We've become aware of creative accounting, beginning with Enron and certainly with the Wall Street crisis, where accounting methods are such that that they render opaque what should be a clear, complete, and easily accessible financial picture. Now, I don't know whether that's happening in the city. I'm not very sophisticated in accounting. But the thing that troubles me and what brings me back to the question of the difference between what is budgeted for a particular year and what is actually spent was a story in the news press about pensions, which indicated that in 2001, 2002, and 2003, the obligation of the city for pension funds was negligible, almost non-existent. But here is a document gotten from the finance department of the city. Mr. Elliott is here and he can confirm, unlike the story in the news press, and I don't know where those figures came from, it shows that the actual amount paid by the city to CalPERS in 2001, instead of being negligible, was almost $8 million. And the amount in 2003 was almost $9.5 million. And Mr. Elliott can tell us whether that is correct or not. Now, as a citizen who isn't very sophisticated with accounting, sometimes has to count on his fingers or his toes, that just creates a very, very confusing thing for a citizen. And I don't know whether it's clear to the council at the time that they made their pension decisions, whether they're operating on what was reported in the Press Citizen, and I assume that came somehow from the city, or whether or not it was these figures that were actually expended. Surely a negligible amount, as it appeared in the story of the news press, which was the basis for pension contracts, is very different from the figure from the finance department, which indicates obligations of between $8 and almost $10 million between 2001 and 2003. And so I'm here just to ask the question, what is it? How much were we actually having to spend in those years? Was it zero? And I've heard city council meetings where zero is the amount that was presented to the public as the amount of the obligation in 2001. And yet I've got this document, Mr. Elliott can confirm it, that indicates that it wasn't zero, it was in the millions of dollars. All I'm asking here is that this data be presented in such a way that it's accessible and clear. My time is up. I had some more to say, but I'll wait for next time.
Thank you. Mike Mohill, I don't believe returned. And you have a card. And Mr. Elliott, I probably will ask you to address that after we finish with Mr. Spiritu.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council and staff. I am Richard Espiritu. Mr. Draymond, I totally agree with you about the quality of our EMTs. And I would personally like to thank the Glendale Fire Department for the number of times they've responded to my mother. However, I do have a particular situation that occurred approximately 4 weeks ago when my mother was transported to our house 1 week prior to her death. She was transported from Glendale Memorial to our house on Dryden, and she was transported by a private ambulance company. Unlike the Glendale Fire Department, they did not have a pulse ox machine. I do have one at home for my mother. We checked my mother's pulse ox, and it turned out to be that she was down to 77%. That particular drivers who were also EMT ones spent the next hour and a half and used up 2.5 tanks of oxygen. Now, if you don't say that is a commitment by someone who does not have a vested interest, I would beg to differ with you on that. I do agree that the Glendale Fire Department would have that type of equipment readily available on any vehicle that they have a paramedic on. The other question that I would like to address is a statement that was made by Mr. Zern, that they had done a feasibility study on the ridership here in Glendale. I personally ride the buses quite often. I even ride it on Saturdays. And there was I read his report, and his report was greatly in error, because on Saturday, on Route 7, they made alleged statement in their report that there was only 4 riders riding that bus between the hours of 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock noon. If there were 4 riders, I was 2 of those riders, one going to Ralph's and one coming back. And I know for a fact that on that particular Saturday, there were at least 6 other riders riding the bus with me on the westbound trip. After talking with the Glendale Beeline bus drivers, I came up with some completely different numbers. So when we get to the issue of realignment and what have you, and I am also in favor of increasing the fares, because we need to increase those fares because they've been down to 25 cents for I don't know how long. That, if we're going to look at that, I think that is one of the issues that this city council must really sit down and look at. But to eliminate services, I'm not too sure of. I'd have to take a look more at the other information that they have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last speaker is Mr. Mohill.
Thank you, Mayor Najarian. Normally I would have something to speak about today, but I thought it was pretty unfair that the fire department and basically 5 council members and city staff ganged up on Mr. Milano when he gave his presentation on the fire department. And if you, with your permission, Mayor Najarian, can I give my allotted time to Mr. Milano, please?
Request denied, Mr. Mohill. Once we start doing that, we go down a very slippery slope. But your time continues, though.
Okay, well, just want the record know that I wanted to allocate my time to Mr. Milano. Okay. I'd like to talk about what I read in the Glendale News Press over the weekend about the salaries and pensions of the city. I found the article very enlightening. The News Press took the time to find out the details, not necessarily 100%, of what's going on in the city of Glendale as far as our pensions and salaries, and talking about a 2-tier system. I think the 2-tier system is obsolete, like the buggy whip. If the private sector can go without pensions, why do government employees need to have pensions? Are they special? What's wrong with Social Security or 401k? That's the first thing. The other thing that I found was very interesting about that article is nobody took responsibility for where we are today as far as salaries and pensions and the budget. The city manager blames Sacramento for his problems, even Washington, D.C., if he could. The unions always say, not my fault, I'm only doing my job. I'm trying to get as much money as I can, even if I don't live in this city, because I'm not a stakeholder. The council says, it's not our fault either, it's Sacramento. And I say, excuse me, what happened to the budgeting? You're the ones who penciled out and says, you know what? We can allocate money either to Rock Haven, Duke Majan Park for $2.2 million, a pet project of Mr. Draymond, or have that money set aside to fix the street on La Cañada Boulevard, where 10,000 people go daily, 1,000 go use that street every day, or Colorado Boulevard, or Glendale Avenue, or Verdugo Road, and the list goes on and on. But we have a pet project by Mr. Draymond for the few hundred people who want to use Rock Haven and Duke Majan Barn. That will put up another $1 million. In other words, we're not going to have $10 million for Rock Haven, and the money keeps going. Why do we need to spend that money now? Why can't we spend that in a few years from now? It took us 10 years to find funding for the Pacific Pool. But this year we finally found the money. So everybody's playing this thing called the blame game. It's not my fault. And the biggest person to blame is the public, who do not come here to voice their opinion like the other people like myself. Thank you, Mayor Najarian.
Thank you. That concludes the cards I have for speaking requests. And Mr. Elliott, I guess the real issue is in the CAFR, it shows that there was a contribution to CalPERS for certain years. And in the budget document, it shows there was not. So I think that properly frames the issue.
If I can address some of the issues, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. First of all, just to remind the public, we do have a full independent audit performed every year. Current auditors is McGladrey and Pullen. They do several months of testing. So I'd like to say there's no Enron cloud of accounting. Accounting is not a creative science. It's, in fact, well, I won't go into it. I'm sure there's a joke there, but accounting is not a creative profession, I can assure you. The data that was produced in the news press was through a public information request, a very long and detailed public information request. We provided the information. And as far as I could see, the article was fairly accurate. There was maybe a couple of things. The way it was said was probably not 100%, but very close. And I can tell you the rates that we had historically in 2001 and 2002 were zero because the funds were superfunded. I don't know what the information that Mr. Milano had in his hand and was passing out today. I'd have to go back and look at that. But the employer portion of the PERS contribution was zero in those years. And I would like to remind everybody that PERS is not an instantaneous thing. It's always a two-year lag time on how things are changed unless you modify the contract, which happened in those years when the formulas were changed from 2 at 50 to 3 at 50 for safety, and then the 2% at 55 to 2.5% at 55 for the miscellaneous. Those went into effect fairly immediately, but normally the data in a pension system is 2 years in arrears, so it's very slow in reacting. Hence why we are projecting higher rate increases for next year and the year after because of the investment losses that PERS has incurred. One other comment Mr. Mohill has made about Social Security. We do not pay Social Security. We pay a Medicare portion to the government, but if those of us that have worked in the private sector and are eligible for Social Security, it is eliminated for the most part through the windfall elimination, so you're not entitled actually to get both Social Security and a pension. So the pensions through PERS were designed to in some respects, compensate for Social Security. Just trying to put that information out there, but we do pay Medicare.
Okay. Next session, whenever that may be, could you take another look and reconcile those numbers? I know you didn't have them in front of you, but I believe he's referring to the CAFR versus our budget document, and I can give you what I had received so you can give us
Appreciate it. Yep.
some clarity on that. Okay, if there's nothing else from my colleagues, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We're adjourned.